My name is Chloe, and a year ago I married the love of my life, Jack. Our relationship was everything I ever dreamed of. They were filled with love, support, and laughter, as if taken from a fairy tale. I was really happy in my family life. I worked as an accountant, mostly from home, which allowed me to flexibly allocate my time and enjoy what I was doing. Although my professional life was not something outstanding, it suited me. Stable, orderly work was satisfying. Jack owned his own auto parts business. His case took a lot of time, but at the same time he always found an opportunity for us. We loved spending time with each other, organizing dinners, watching movies, or just walking in the park. Our days were filled with quiet happiness and warmth. On weekends, we often took part in various events, parties, meetings with friends, corporate gatherings. Jack had a large social circle, friends, colleagues, business partners. I felt like a part of this world, although at first I was worried about how I would be received. However, these meetings had their own charm. I became closer to Jack. I understood his life better. One sunny Saturday morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of freshly brewed coffee. The light aroma of the drink filled the air, creating a feeling of comfort. I was idly looking through my email when Jack came into the room. His smile was wide and sincere. "Hey, pretty girl," he said, leaning over to give me a peck on the cheek. "Mike is having a barbecue at his house tonight. I thought we could go out, have fun, have a drink, meet everyone." "It sounds great," I replied, already looking forward to the evening. By 7 o'clock we arrived at Mike's house. A light breeze carried the smell of fried meat. The laughter of the guests sounded like music, filling the courtyard. Jack held my hand tightly as he made his way through the crowd. We greeted acquaintances, exchanged smiles on duty, until I noticed her. A tall blonde with perfect posture was talking animatedly with a group of people. Her laugh was bright and ringing, as if she had just told the funniest joke in the world. Her gaze swept over the crowd, and it seemed to me that she appraised everyone present. "Who is this?" I asked, nodding slightly in her direction. Jack seemed to tense up. It was almost imperceptible, but I knew him well enough to sense the change. "This is Vanessa, my ex-girlfriend," he said finally. His voice was even, but there was a slight tension in it. Before I could say anything, Mike spotted us. He waved his hand, beckoning us over. "Jack. Chloe. I'm glad you could come. Let me introduce you all." We walked up to the group where Vanessa was standing. When she saw us, her smile widened, but her eyes remained cold. It seemed that her gaiety was a game, a mask hiding her true emotions. "Oh, if it's not Jack and his wife," she said. Her tone was caustic, and the word wife sounded like it left an unpleasant aftertaste. I forced a smile, not wanting to show that her words had hurt me. "Nice to meet you, Vanessa." "I'm Chloe," I said, holding out my hand for a handshake. She glanced at my hand as if it were an object she didn't even want to touch. Ignoring me, she turned to Jack. "Jackie, dear, how many years, how many winters? You have to tell me everything about what you've been doing." Her voice sounded like sweet honey, but there was something poisonous hidden in every note. I bristled when she used that nickname, but Jack quickly intervened, trying to smooth over the awkwardness. "Good to see you, Vanessa." "Chloe and I were great," he squeezed my hand lightly, his voice flat, without a trace of irritation. "How are you? Are you still working for your father's company?" Her smile faltered for a moment, but she immediately regained her composure. "Oh, you know me, Jack. I like to leave my options open," she replied, with a slight sneer in her voice, her gaze unobtrusively sliding in my direction. "Unlike some people, I don't bind myself, restrictions." This evening was the beginning of a chain of strange, intense meetings. The conversation I was involved in lasted for several hours. Vanessa managed to stay in the spotlight by making subtle but well-aimed remarks that left an unpleasant aftertaste. She seemed to radiate confidence, hiding behind her sarcasm. It's been a few weeks since that meeting, and I've noticed that Vanessa is showing up at our events more and more often. She was like a shadow appearing in the most unexpected places. Every time she looked at me, I felt uncomfortable. Her remarks always sounded like jokes, but their true meaning was too obvious. One evening, at another dinner party at Jack's business partner, I was chatting with several women when Vanessa came up to us with a glass of champagne. "Oh, Chloe," she said with a sickeningly sweet intonation. "This. An interesting outfit." I didn't know that the librarian style was back in fashion. I looked at my knee-length skirt and blouse, which I had felt confident in until that moment, but now suddenly felt awkward. "I think it's quite appropriate for a dinner party," I said, trying to keep my voice even. Her laughter sounded like the sound of broken glass. "Of course, honey. Not everyone can afford haute couture like that. Some of us." Her dress, if you could call this revealing outfit that, was more suitable for a nightclub than for a formal evening. I resisted the urge to point this out, only apologized modestly and went to look for Jack. Since then, her behavior has become increasingly defiant. Vanessa started posting photos from our meetings on social media. In all the pictures, she carefully cropped me or placed me so that my face was in shadow. The captions under these photos were thinly veiled insults. One day, while flipping through the feed, I came across a particularly humiliating post. One of the photos showed Vanessa, radiant and flawless, next to an unflattering shot of me looking tired. The signature read, "Who are you? Vote in the comments to see who is the best fit for Jack." My face flushed with anger and humiliation. In the comments, people openly supported her, and some wrote that Jack must have completely lost his mind to choose me instead of her. When Jack came home from work, I couldn't keep quiet anymore. "We need to talk about Vanessa," I said, meeting him in the hallway. He sighed wearily, loosening his tie. "What did she do this time?" I handed him the phone, showing him the post. Jack's face darkened as he scrolled through the comments. "This is unacceptable," he muttered. "I'll talk to her, tell her to delete it." "It's not enough," my voice faltered, but I looked him firmly in the eye. "I want you to tell her to stay away from us. No more communication. I don't want to see her at our meetings." Jack was silent for a moment, then nodded. "Good. I'll talk to her." Jack ran a hand through his hair, looking awkward. His gaze darted around the room as if he was trying to find the right words to explain his position. "Chloe, I can't do this," he finally said, sounding tired. "She is the daughter of an important business partner. I can't just ban her from social events." "So what? Do I just have to accept that she's bullying me?" My voice got louder, and I got up from the couch so I wouldn't feel down about the situation. "Of course not," Jack replied quickly, raising his hands in a conciliatory gesture. He took a step towards me and put his arm around my shoulders. "I'll talk to her, make it clear that such behavior is unacceptable. But you have to understand, I can't get rid of her completely without risking my business relationship." I pulled away from him, feeling frustration building inside me. "What about our relationship, Jack? Don't they matter?" "Of course they do," he said, looking offended. His gaze met mine, full of sincerity. "You know you're the only one I love. It's all in the past, Chloe. I chose you. Do you remember?" His words should have comforted me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of our problems. Lying in bed that night, I felt an invisible crack running through our ideal world. In the following weeks, Vanessa's behavior became more and more brazen. Every party or meeting turned into an opportunity for her to show her superiority, hurt me, or get closer to Jack. At one of the events organized by his colleague, I carefully thought out my image: a simple but elegant black dress, modest jewelry, everything to feel confident. However, my calmness evaporated as soon as Vanessa appeared in the doorway. Her bright red dress, which clung to every line of her figure, made the guests turn around. She moved with the grace of a predator, and her gaze instantly found Jack. "Jack, dear," she exclaimed, completely ignoring my presence. "You look absolutely amazing today." Before either of us could respond, She put her hand on his arm and lightly stroked it. Would you like to dance for old time's sake? My blood literally boiled with anger, but Jack quickly pulled away from her grip. Thanks, Vanessa, but I'm here with my wife. Maybe another time, he said evenly, putting his arm around my waist. When we left the party, I felt a slight thrill of victory. Jack showed that he had chosen me, and it warmed me up. But the feeling was short-lived. Throughout the night, Vanessa continued to look for ways to be alone with him, coming up with far-fetched reasons or business questions. To Jack's credit, he rejected her attempts every time, engaging me in conversation or quickly coming back to my side. But her constant attention was exhausting for both of us. As time passed, her actions became more and more explicit. She began posting provocative comments under Jack's social media posts, each time highlighting their shared past. At parties, she would loudly recall events related to him, excluding me from the conversation. The climax occurred at our friend Tom's birthday party. It was an ordinary backyard barbecue, but Vanessa showed up, as always, fashionably late. Her dress, more suitable for the red carpet, attracted all eyes. Her deliberate demonstrativeness left no doubt that she had come to steal the show again. As soon as she entered, her gaze swept over the crowd until it settled on Jack. She smiled, moving toward him as if no one else existed in the room. Vanessa. Her voice, sounding through the speaker of the phone, like a drop of poison spreading through my mind, caused me to be both irritated and wary. I was silent for a few seconds, trying to figure out why she was calling. Chloe, darling, are you there? Her voice was deceptively soft, but I caught a hint of mockery in it. What do you need, Vanessa? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. She laughed softly, as if I'd said something funny. Oh, I just wanted to know how you were. Jack is on a business trip right now, isn't he? It must be so lonely for you alone in this big house. My heart skipped a beat. How did she know Jack was gone? I didn't tell anyone about it, not even on social media. It's none of your business, I replied, trying not to show my concern. Oh, but I wish I could help, she continued, her voice sounding too sweet to be sincere. If you need anything. The company, for example. Just let me know. I felt anger boiling inside me, but I forced myself to breathe evenly. I'm doing fine without your help, Vanessa, I said coldly. If that's all, then I have a lot to do. Of course, dear, she replied with false humility. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. You know how much I care about Jack. And about you too. Her words were like a punch in the gut. Before I could answer, she hung up, leaving me alone with the beeps. I put the phone down and closed my eyes, trying to calm my pulse. Her sudden call threw me off balance. It was obvious that Vanessa was up to something. Her behavior at parties, angry comments on social media, and now this call, everything was forming an alarming picture. The next day, I decided to distract myself by cleaning the house and cooking dinner in case Jack returned earlier. But the feeling of anxiety did not leave me. Every sound in the house seemed suspicious to me, every phone call made my heart beat faster. By Saturday evening, I heard a faint knock on the door. It was strange. We lived in a quiet neighborhood where neighbors rarely came without warning. I went to the door and looked through the peephole, but I didn't see anyone. A strange uneasiness took hold of me. I opened the door. There was a small envelope on the doorstep with no name or return address. I found a photo inside. Jack and Vanessa were on it. They were sitting at a table in a restaurant. Vanessa was leaning towards him, holding his hand. I felt my heart sink into my stomach. Was it an old photo? Or did it happen recently? Jack didn't mention that he had met her. At that moment, my phone rang again. It was Jack. Hi, honey, his voice sounded warm as usual. How are you doing? Jack, I interrupted him, barely able to keep the tremor out of my voice. We need to talk. There was a tense silence on the other end of the line. Chloe, what happened? What is it? He finally asked. His voice sounded worried, but I couldn't tell if it was sincerity or an attempt to hide something. I just got a photo, I said, trying to speak slowly and clearly to keep my emotions at bay. You and Vanessa are in it. You're in a restaurant somewhere. Do you want to explain what this means? There was silence on the other end of the line again. I felt anger building in my chest. This. An old photo, Chloe, he finally said, but his voice became strained. I do not know who could have sent this to you, but I am sure that Vanessa is behind it. Old? I had to restrain myself from screaming. Then why didn't you even mention that you once spent time with her in a place like this? And if it's really an old photo, why would she send it to me now? Because she wants to break us up. He replied sharply, and there was a note of irritation in his voice. You know what she's like, Chloe. She'll do anything to ruin our marriage. His words sounded logical, but I couldn't get rid of my doubts. Was that an excuse? Or was he really not lying? Okay, I said, trying not to betray my doubts. But if she's as dangerous as you say, why haven't you put her in her place yet? I've already said I'll explain everything to her, Jack sighed. Just trust me. But I couldn't. This photo, her call, everything she had done in recent months left no room for trust. You know what, Jack, I said quietly, when you get back, we'll talk about this in person. In the meantime, enjoy your trip. I hung up the phone without waiting for his answer. Everything was boiling inside me. I was angry at him, at Vanessa, but most of all at myself. At his inability to understand what was going on. I couldn't sleep for a long time that night. Unanswered questions were spinning in my head, and the anxiety I'd been feeling since Jack left had now turned into a real storm. The next day, I decided to act. If Jack couldn't handle Vanessa, then I'd do it myself. In the morning, I pulled myself together and sat down at the computer. First, I tried to find out which restaurant the photo was taken in. The setting in the picture seemed familiar, and I, looking through my notes and old photos on my phone, finally found what I was looking for. It was the restaurant where Jack and I once had dinner with his colleagues. This place was only a few kilometers from our house. I called the restaurant, introduced myself, and asked them to check if they had any reservations in Jack's name in recent days. I had an excuse prepared. Allegedly, I lost something valuable in the restaurant and wanted to clarify the date of the last visit. Surprisingly, the receptionist was ready to help. Yes, Jack was with us 2 days ago, she said. He had dinner with a woman. She left a very pleasant impression. Those words hit me like lightning. I thanked her politely and hung up. This is not an old photo. Jack was lying. Now I had no doubt, I had to find out the truth to the end. I'd been working on a plan all day. I knew that a confrontation with Vanessa would be risky, but I wasn't going to leave it just like that. By the evening, I plucked up the courage and texted her. Vanessa, we need to talk. Tonight. Just you and me. Come to our house at 7 o'clock. The answer came almost immediately. Oh, Chloe, I'm glad you finally decided to talk. I will. Her confidence, almost cheeky willingness to meet, irritated me even more. But I was ready. At the appointed time, I stood at the window and waited for her. Vanessa's car stopped in front of the house to the minute. She came out, as always, perfectly dressed, with a cold smile on her face. I opened the door before she could knock. Oh, how nice of you to invite me, she said, entering the house as if it were her own. Well, shall we drink tea and discuss secrets, dear? Sit down, Vanessa, I replied, pointing to a chair at the dining table. My voice was even, but inside I was seething. She sat cross-legged and tilted her head slightly, watching me with the look of a predator. So, what do you want to know, Chloe? Did Jack really leave you alone again? That's enough, Vanessa, I said firmly. I'm not going to play your games. You know why I called you. Tell me what's going on. Her eyes sparkled, and the corners of her lips twitched slightly in a grin. Well, darling, if you insist so much. She paused, as if enjoying the tension. Jack and I are, let's just say, old friends. And I think that you yourself understand that such connections do not break so easily. My heart started pounding faster, but I held on. Do you really think you can ruin our marriage? I asked, squinting. Vanessa leaned forward, her voice a whisper. Chloe, darling, I've already done it. You just haven't figured it out yet. Her words sounded like a gunshot. Vanessa's face contorted with a mixture of surprise and anger. Her smile faltered, turning into a strained mask. She tried to hide her confusion, but her eyes betrayed her inner storm. Oh, how unexpected, she said with a strained smile that did not reach her eyes. Who would have thought? Vanessa sat down at the table again, but her confidence seemed to be slightly shaken. Jack's friends began to whisper, looking at each other. Tom, who used to tease me about my humble profession, looked up again. Wait, Chloe, he said, lowering his voice. You mean this place belongs to you? I nodded gently, trying not to give my answer pathos. Yes, I bought the restaurant a few years ago when I wanted to expand my investments. I manage his business and accounting myself. This is incredible, he muttered, while the others at the table looked at me with new respect. The manager, who returned with the menu for me, smiled and clarified. Madam, should I bring you your usual order, or would you like to choose something from today's recommendations? Let it be my usual one, thank you, I replied with a slight smile. Vanessa, who had been sitting in silence before, finally broke the silence. How interesting, she said slowly, choosing her words clearly. Jack never mentioned that you were so adventurous. Maybe because I don't like to flaunt it, I replied calmly, looking her straight in the eye. The silence at the table became more and more awkward. Someone tried to start a new topic, but the tension between Vanessa and me hung in the air like a taut string. Okay, Chloe, she said, her voice filled with venom, but she tried not to show her emotions. Tell us, how do you combine all this? Running a restaurant, accounting, and being Jack's wife. It must be hard. I looked at her, feeling the anger inside me give way to a cool calmness. You know, Vanessa, I began, emphasizing every word, when you do what you love and you're with someone who supports you, everything seems much easier. My gaze shifted to the others at the table, and I added, I'm just lucky that Jack has always believed in me and my work. He inspires me. Vanessa's face paled. She tried to object, but her voice was silenced by the approving smiles and slight nods from Jack's friends. It's amazing, she murmured. As the evening went on, I could feel the dynamics at the table changing. Now I wasn't Jack's wife sitting in the shadows, but someone who was taken seriously. Vanessa tried her best to regain her attention by inserting caustic comments, but they no longer had the effect she expected. When dinner came to an end and the guests began to leave, Vanessa came up to me. Her smile was strained again. Well, Chloe, she said softly, so that no one would hear. Congratulations. You really surprised me today. Thank you, Vanessa, I replied with icy calm. Do you know what else is amazing? The way people try to destroy what they can't have. Her eyes widened, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she turned around and walked out, leaving me standing in the doorway. When I returned home, the feeling of triumph still held me. I knew that this evening had changed a lot. Vanessa tried to humiliate me, but in the end she was the loser. Now she knew that I was not someone who could be broken. Vanessa stared at the invitation in my hand as if it were someone else's ticket to her private paradise. Her face, which had been flushed with indignation a moment ago, became as hard as a mask. Have you been invited? Her voice was filled with venom. In the category of entrepreneurial debut? This must be a joke. I sighed, keeping my composure. No, Vanessa, this is not a joke, I replied in a flat voice. This is a recognition of my work and achievements. She smiled mockingly, crossing her arms over her chest. Oh, of course. How could I forget that you're the owner of the restaurant now? But, real leaders gather here. Those who really change the game. Thanks for the opinion, Vanessa. I raised a glass of champagne to my lips, trying to hide a smile. But it seems that the organizers of the event think differently. Her eyes narrowed, and I could literally feel her seething with anger. Do you really think you can compete with people like me? She hissed. Vanessa, I put my glass on the edge of the fountain and looked her straight in the eye. I don't need to compete with you. We live in completely different worlds. Her face twisted with anger, but before she could answer, one of the organizers of the evening came up to us. A tall, personable man in an immaculately fitted suit. Mrs. Chloe, he smiled affably, holding out his hand. How wonderful to see you here. We are very pleased that you have accepted our invitation. Thank you, Mr. Harrington, I replied, shaking his hand. It's a great honor for me. The man turned to Vanessa, his smile fading slightly, becoming neutral. Miss Vanessa, he nodded. Glad to see you again. Her smile returned, but now it seemed strained. Of course, Mr. Harrington, she replied, abruptly changing her tone. I am always happy to support such important events. He nodded, but clearly lost interest in her, turning back to me. We'll start the ceremony soon, Mrs. Chloe. Your success is inspiring, and we are glad that you are with us. With that, he walked away, leaving us alone. Vanessa watched him leave in silence, then turned back to me. You may think you've won, but it's not over yet, she hissed before turning abruptly and disappearing into the crowd. I sighed, feeling both relieved and slightly annoyed. This evening was important to me, and I wasn't going to let her ruin it. A few minutes later, Jack returned, his smile instantly dispelling my tension. Is everything all right? What is it? He asked, looking into my eyes. Absolutely, I replied, taking his arm. This evening will be memorable. And I was right. When my name was announced as the winner in my category, I felt pride and joy fill me. I went on stage to applause, feeling that I had finally reached the point where I didn't have to prove anything, not to Jack, not to Vanessa, not even to myself. Mr. Thompson coldly pulled away, withdrawing his hand as if his daughter's touch had burned him. His face remained stony, but there was an icy determination in his eyes. You didn't know? He said with sarcastic severity, looking straight into Vanessa's tears. You know, Vanessa, I gave you the opportunity to learn respect, adulthood, common sense. But as I see it, all my efforts were in vain. His words cut off the air around us like a sharp blade. The people gathered around looked on with bated curiosity. Some were clearly uncomfortable, but no one tried to interfere. Vanessa, trembling with humiliation and anger, wrapped her arms around her shoulders, as if trying to hold on to the remnants of her dignity. Dad, I'm asking you. It was a mistake, she sobbed. I can fix it. Fix it? Mr. Thompson interrupted her. His voice sounded calm, but there was a threat in it. It's too late for that, Vanessa. You have discredited me, our family and, most importantly, yourself. At this point, my father, William Carter, who had remained silent until now, finally decided to intervene. His voice was firm, but with a hint of sympathy. Thompson, maybe we should give her a chance to prove that she is capable of change. Mr. Thompson turned slowly to my father, and their eyes met. It was as if there was a mute understanding between them, and the tension in the air eased a little. Perhaps, William, he replied stiffly. But this will not mean that I will continue to financially support her. If she wants to prove something, she has to do it herself. Vanessa's head snapped up, her face contorted with a mixture of hope and despair. Thanks, Dad. I promise I'll prove it to you. But Mr. Thompson interrupted her, his gaze remaining cold. Not to me, Vanessa. To myself. With that, he turned around and addressed Jack and me again. I'm sorry about this scene. I hope she doesn't ruin your evening. Jack, who was standing next to me, nodded, putting his hand on my shoulder. It's all right, Mr. Thompson, he replied. But you're right, there's a lot to spoil here." His tone was ironic, but there was also determination in it. He turned to Vanessa, his gaze filled with disgust. "You try to destroy Chloe because she's stronger than you. Because she has achieved what you only dream of. But do you know what the most amazing thing is? She's never stooped to your level, Vanessa. And that makes her 1,000 times better than you." Vanessa opened her mouth to reply, but couldn't find the words. Tears began to flow down her cheeks again. She turned away and, without saying a word, wandered away from the hall. I stood in silence, feeling the tension gradually leave my body. Jack squeezed my shoulder, forcing me to look at him. "Are you okay?" "What is it?" he asked softly. I nodded, allowing myself a small smile. "I'm fine. I think it was inevitable." We both turned to Mr. Thompson and my father. They seemed to have already returned to discussing business, but there was a spark of satisfaction in their eyes. "Thank you for standing up for me, Dad," I said, turning to my father. He hugged me, smiling warmly as always. "You did a great job on your own, Chloe. I just gave you a platform." Jack laughed softly, wrapping his arms around my waist. "This is the platform," he said. "I don't think anyone will underestimate you now, Chloe." We stood there, surrounded by the sounds of lively conversation and the clink of glasses, and I felt that this evening was a turning point. Vanessa disappeared from our lives, and I knew that only the best was ahead of us. Once in the car, where Jack and I were enjoying the quiet luxury of the moment, I thought about how much my life had changed over the past year. Parties, social fuss, dramatic meetings, and bright victories, all this formed a mosaic where every detail found its place. Jack held my hand, his fingers lightly touching mine, as if confirming that we had been through all the storms together and were now enjoying the clear sky. "You know I'm proud of you, right?" he said softly, breaking the soft rumble of the engine. I turned to him, meeting his gaze. His eyes, warm and sincere, have always been my refuge. "Thank you," I replied with a smile. "But I wouldn't have done it without you." He laughed, shaking his head slightly. "That's not true, Chloe. You would have been incredible from the very beginning. I'm just glad that I can be there when you conquer this world." His words warmed me like the soft touch of the sun. We drove up to a large mansion, where music was already playing, and soft candlelight illuminated the garden, filling the evening with romantic light. Jack opened the car door, gave me his hand, and together we entered the hospitable house where our friends were waiting for us. The party was light and lively. We laughed, talked about the future, recalled funny and touching moments. Everything has become easier, as if the world has shed an old, heavy shell. When it was late evening and Jack and I were standing in the garden, enjoying the starry sky, I allowed myself to think about Vanessa again. "Do you really think she can change?" Jack asked, putting his arm around my shoulders. "I want to believe that," I answered honestly. "People are able to change if they get the right incentive." He nodded, his chin lightly touching my head. "You're too kind, as always." "Maybe," I agreed, smiling. "But, you know, this feeling that I did everything right, that I gave her a chance, gives me peace." We stood in quiet contemplation while the sky above us filled with stars. It seemed that every moment, every detail of that night emphasized how much stronger we had become after going through difficulties. And although Vanessa is in the past, her story has become a lesson for me about the power of self-confidence, the importance of being true to your principles, and how important it is to remain yourself in any situation. Jack looked at me with the same love that once made me strong, and I knew that our lives ahead would only get better.